I was visiting with a childhood friend a few weeks ago, who we will call Steve, and after reminiscing on the past for a while, we decided it was time to drink. We brought a cooler into the large property he had bought off of his parents. This was the same place he grew up, and I would often visit him when we were younger, so we knew the path to go down. We had a specific place in mind. See, when we were kids, we explored this property all over, pretending like there were monsters in the forest and scavenging for makeshift tools. Of course, a fort or base was high on the priority list. So when we found what appeared to be a doomsday-style bunker, we quickly established this as the hangout spot. And eventually, we even got the generator in there to start working, and we would just watch movies and hang out. However, as we became teenagers, it also became a place to hide away alcohol and drink without parents finding out. And even though we were adults now, and Steve owned this property, there was something nostalgic about being out at the bunker. We talked for a while, but at some point he had to go back to the house, and he assured me he would be back in a few minutes. And considering it was about a 15-minute walk, I knew it would be a while. So while he was gone, I decided to go into the bunker and see if everything was still working. And as I climbed down the ladder, the dust and cobwebs told me that it had been a minute since he had been down. However, I eventually found the generator and some remaining gasoline in a container, and to my surprise, it started right up. The lights came on, and I realized he must not have gone in here since we were teenagers. The steel chair setup was in the main area, with a television and VCR player hooked up. And the storage area had plenty of old MREs and astronaut food, and covered in a thin film of dust. I walked over to the VCR, and noticed there was a dusty box next to it with several movies. As I shuffled through them, I came across a tape with black Sharpie, labeled, "Those Things I Fear." And I had no recollection of watching this, or even what it could be. However, I figured it was some obscure horror movie, and I was pretty bored. I put the tape into the VCR and turned on the television, wiping the screen off so I could actually see. The tape showed just a black screen for about 15 minutes, before an image came on that appeared to be a security camera from the upper corner of a room. There was a format for a time and date, but it appeared to be random numbers. In the room, there was a television, a couple of chairs, and as I watched with curiosity, I noticed in the background a ladder came down. Then, two teenagers began to climb down and sit down in the chairs. As I continued to watch, my blood ran cold. Those kids were me and Steve, but we had never been recording as far as I know. I look up to where the camera would have been, in the upper corner of the bunker. No camera or any sign of a camera being there. I ejected the tape and shut off the bunker before heading back to Steve's house. And I found him slumped on his couch, clearly in no state to be walking. "Hey, Steve, did you have cameras set up in the bunker when we were kids?" I asked him, unsure if he was in any state to respond. "Camera? No, man, why would I put cameras in there?" Steve responded, not giving it much thought. "Well, I found this tape and put it back." And Steve interrupted with a sudden sense of soberness in his voice, and I began to respond when he stood up suddenly. "Listen to me carefully. Put it back where you found it, and come back to the house." And I nodded, and I headed back down the trail to do what he said. And I wanted to question his strange reaction, but something told me he was right. And at this point, I felt like eyes were on me from all directions as I made my way back through the woods. And I finally arrived at the bunker and placed the tape back in the box. Then I turned around and headed back to the house. Steve didn't want to talk about it at all, and I decided not to push him on it. We hung out for the night, and the next day I returned home, forgetting the experience entirely. and I tried to chalk it up to some sort of weird prank, but that didn't seem like too convincing of a theory. But either way, I pushed it out of my mind, getting back to my everyday life. That was until a week later. And I had gotten home from work early that day. When I checked my mailbox, I found a package with no return address. When I opened it, all that was inside was a VHS tape. And it was labeled, "Those Things You Fear." And is this a prank from Steve? And I have no idea what to do. The only thing I can think is that I'm terrified, but I'm also tempted to watch the tape. I have an old VHS player in my attic I could grab, but I'm not sure if that's wise. Please, any suggestions would be helpful. Hey guys, it's been a few days since my first post, and a lot has happened since then. I'm exhausted and stressed out, but I'm writing yet again because I'm not sure what else to do. I attempted to consider all of my options before making a decision about the tapes. Many of you have warned me that watching the tape would be a terrible idea, and have suggested that the knowledge of what's on the tape isn't worth the risk. Others have said I wouldn't be able to stop thinking about it if I don't watch it. And if you have asked if I do watch the tape, try to have Steve with me. Since it's been a few days, I broke down the days into entries for ease of reading. Thursday, October 12th, 2023. I called Steve to tell him about the second tape. Unfortunately, his cell went straight to voicemail. I tried to call him a few more times throughout the day, and the same thing occurred. I was starting to get worried. I had begun to consider driving out to his house to check on him, but he finally called me back late that night. "Hey, Steve, I'm glad you're all right. I need to ask you about..." And then he cut me off abruptly. "I do not want to talk about the tape." I was caught off guard by this, but he continued, "You have no idea what you're getting into. Just forget about it." Before I could respond, Steve hung up on me. He didn't respond to any more of my calls. I decided I should probably heed his advice, as well as most of the comments on my original post. I would forget about the tape. I didn't do anything as melodramatic as burning the tape, but I did throw it out. I figured that putting it out of sight at least would allow me to move on from it. Then, I woke up in the middle of the night, standing in my living room. I was alarmed, but quickly realized I must have been sleepwalking. This had been something that occurred frequently when I was a child, but it had been a very long time. I would have just assumed it was a minor relapse, until I realized what I held in my hand. I threw the tape in the bin outside again, and went back to bed. I was a little rattled, but my exhaustion won. I planned to just figure out the mess in the morning. On Friday, October 13th, 2023. I had the day off, and I tried my best not to think about the tape, but something about it was alluring. Almost like it had a hold of me. I distracted myself through the day with video games, but eventually my mind would wander back to it. I called Steve again. Of course, he didn't respond or call back. At this point, I was getting worried about him. But based on his response the day before, I assumed he wanted to be left alone. It was starting to get late. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I went and found the tape in the bin outside, and set up my VHS player. Everything inside of me was telling me this was a terrible idea, but my curiosity was winning out. I had to know what's on the tape. And I took a deep breath and inserted the tape into the VHS player. And as the screen flickered, I began to feel a deep sense of dread. I couldn't pinpoint exactly why, but deep down I think I knew I'd made a mistake, that there was no going back from. The image appeared to be from the point of view of someone in the backseat of a vehicle, which was on the highway. And it was hard to see as whatever it was crouched down, as if hiding from whoever was in the driver's seat. I watched in anticipation, But nothing happened immediately. A call rang out from my cell phone, startling me. It was Steve, so I quickly answered. Hey man, I saw your post. Wait for me, I'm on the way. And Steve said, his breath sounding heavy. Steve, why weren't you answering earlier? Listen man, I'm sorry, but you have to trust me. Wait for me, and don't watch that tape until I get there. The camera on screen began to move, and suddenly it all clicked. It was the back seat of Steve's car, and now it reared up. Steve was in full view, on the phone driving. He hadn't noticed yet. Steve, behind you. I wasn't able to finish as the call dropped. The camera's point of view lunged towards them and the screen went to static. And that was the end of the tape. It's been 2 months since I last posted, so I decided I should finally update any of you who care to read. I'm going to try to recount what has happened since the last time, but some of the details are hazy. It's like I've been in a fog, but I believe I've been able to recount the events accurately enough. Steve died in a car accident. That's the official story, and I had no way to prove otherwise. I had considered turning the tape in as evidence, but upon re-examining it, I was met with the grim reality that it was blank. Whatever I saw that day was not displayed on the tape. Of course, in hindsight, the tape appeared to be displaying footage as it happened, like some sort of analog live stream. I immediately packed up the necessities and got a hotel room in the neighboring town. I wasn't quite ready to quit my job, so I stayed there while trying to figure out what I could do about the situation. While I had time to think, I decided to break down the facts. I found the first tape in a mysterious bunker that Steve claimed he hadn't entered for years. It displayed footage from a non-existent camera. Steve didn't want to talk about it, so clearly he knew something. The second tape was delivered directly to my mailbox. When I finally decided to watch the tape, it depicted Steve's final moments in real time. I hadn't really had the time to process the death of my best friend. I honestly am not sure if I have been able to even now. But the one thing I knew is that I needed to figure out what these things were, and if so, how to stop them. And that's when it hit me. And if I wanted answers, then I would have to go back to Steve's house. I would have to go back to the bunker. I made the trip out to his property. I got in pretty easily because I remembered his bad habit of leaving the back door unlocked. I entered the house to find it was fairly well kept, and nothing initially seemed to be out of the ordinary. The one strange detail was the VHS player hooked up in the television in the living room. But given the circumstances, this wasn't surprising. However, I couldn't shake the sense of something's eyes on me. Maybe it was just paranoia, but could you blame me after what happened so far? After searching almost the entire house, I finally got into his room. I put my hacking skills to the test by guessing the password to his computer. It was 1234. That's Steve for you. The last thing that was left open was my first post here. I knew something had to have spurred his sudden change of tone that day. I wondered if I had never posted, maybe he would still be alive. I then turned to a journal he had left on his computer desk. From its contents, it seemed to be a pretty typical diary. But as the entries went on, things progressively got more strange. He wrote about strange dreams, some of the pages even having his own sketches, depicting shadowy figures with prominent hollow eyes, drawings of beings without form, and ramblings without coherent meaning. Suddenly, I heard creaking, which I discerned to be the sound of his back door being opened from the living room. I quickly closed the diary and rushed out of the room. The door was still open, the wind howling, And at the foot of the door was, unsurprisingly, a VHS tape. And I walked over to it cautiously, closing the door and locking it. Then I picked up the tape and read what was written on it. Those things we fear. Those things you fear. Those things I fear. Those things we fear. I said aloud to myself, trying to figure out what the correlation was with the names on the tapes. And what did it mean? The more information I discovered, the less any of it made sense. I held the tape, contemplating my next move. I noticed the weather outside progressing into a windy storm. The scene was being set, and it seemed like my fate was imminent. After taking a deep breath, I put the tape into the VHS player. And after a moment of static, the tape began what appeared to be an analog television. Upon closer inspection, it appeared to be the television from the bunker. The camera angle had moved, as if standing up. Similar to the tape from the last entry, the point of view shown in the tape appeared to be that of someone or something. It climbed out of the bunker and proceeded to move through the forest. Then it started moving down the trail, and I realized all too late what was happening. Whatever it was heading towards Steve's house, towards me. And I looked around in a panic, taking note that the storm outside had escalated to the level of intensity bordering on causing damage to the house. On the tape, the entity was traveling through the forest at insane speeds, to the point it appeared to be gliding across the forest floor. Before I knew it, the house was in its sights. And at the last second, I ducked behind the couch as the glass pane door was shattered. I stayed crouched behind the couch, holding my breath. I peeked over to get a glimpse at the entity. I expected to see some sort of monstrosity, some demonic beast standing in the living room. However, what I did see was far more confusing. There was nothing there. And I looked at the television, and it still was showing that thing's point of view. Yet, there was nothing visible to my naked eye. And I realized that although I couldn't see it, my only advantage was that I could see what it was seeing through the television. Luckily, it hadn't spotted me yet. I slowly crawled around the couch, mirroring it so my location wouldn't be detected. Finally, I managed to get to the VCR. I clicked eject on the VCR, and as the tape began to eject, the last image I saw was the monster's POV, snapping towards me. I clenched the tape tightly and leapt towards the now shattered doors, unsure if this thing could harm me while the tape wasn't playing. And I got my answer as I heard the destruction of the television from behind me, as if something had leapt towards it. In the greatest burst of speed in my entire life, I made my way outside and battled through the storm towards my vehicle. And I peeled out of his property, and taking note in my rearview mirror, as a section of the fence collapsed. The monster was catching up to my truck, the only evidence of its existence being the mailboxes and fence posts that were laid out in its path of destruction. And I booked it as fast as I could, finally making it to the highway, and seemingly losing the entity. And I drove for hours until finally settling on a small town I hadn't heard of. And I've been in the hotel since then, unsure of where the creature is. And if I truly lost it, then I can't imagine it would find me this far out. But maybe if I put in the tape again, I will be able to see its whereabouts. But something tells me that's what it wants. I have no idea what to do at this point. I'm running out of savings and my will is growing weaker by the day. I don't know what to do. I've been getting nightmares. I've been seeing them, those things that shouldn't be seen. We wish to know the things that we shouldn't, and our curiosity cannot be quenched. Maybe some things don't need to be known. Those things that we cannot comprehend. Those things that we fear.